All right, Shabbos, good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's shir. To thank our Torah sponsors. So the month of Tishrei, Haba Alinu Latova, last day of Tishrei, Yolan, Kelman, in celebration of completion of Seder Nezikin, and for Besoros Tovos for all of Am Yisrael. Nathan is Perry Smith, in the schos of the entire Kehillah. Our week of learning sponsors, Zevi Daniel. Quote Zevi, I'm excited to be back in person for a few days to learn with our holy Chevra. There's no Chevra like our SOTC Chevra. In belated honor of David Schwartz's remarkable Sima Torah, Mazel Tov, Mazel Tov. Daf Yomi today, sponsored by Seydin Simhakin, B'chazdi Hashem Yisbarach. We're gifted another granddaughter, Mazel Tov, born to Orly and Daniel Rosenthal. Seydin was just here. It was just here. All right. Good. You wish him Mazel Tov, Mir Hashem, when he gets back inside. Mazel Tov, and continued Simchas. And during this week of Shiva for Rabbi Howard, Mazel Tov. During this week of Shiva for Rabbi Howard, we dedicate our learning Le'iloi Nishmas, Harav Moshe Yisrael ben Binyamin Zichron Librach. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, his neshama will have an aliyah, his family in nechama, and halai should be zocheh me'eretz Hashem to besoros tovos for all of Klal Yisrael. And of course, we dedicate our learning as well Le'iloi Nishmas. Sorry, I'm just gathering everything. Le'iloi Nishmas Shlomo Aryeh Ribiko, the son of Larry and Esther Ribiko, the grandson of Rabbi Price Zichron Livracha, who was niftar in Eretz Yisrael. The Levaya is today, and Shiva will be observed here in Baltimore. So we dedicate our learning Le'iloi Nishmas Shlomo Aryeh. Okay, I don't have Larry's Hebrew name, but Yerachmiel, Shlomo Aryeh ben Yerachmiel. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, HaKohen. Shlomo Aryeh ben Yerachmiel HaKohen. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, his precious neshama will have an aliyah. The family in Nechama, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will, Amir Hashem, truly bring besoros tovos and Nechama to his people. With that, let us begin. Today's daf is Lamed Ches 38, and we are picking up Amir Hashem on Lamed Zayin Amud Beis 37b at the two dots. So the Mishnah says as follows. Let me quote from the Mishnah: V'achatos shtei matanos. So says, if you remember again, going back to yesterday's daf, we were introduced to a very interesting Mishnah. So the Mishnah spoke about the idea that halacha l'maisa, once one has performed the minimum number of applications, so therefore again halacha l'maisa, the carbon is affected. So Beis Shammai said that essentially the minimum number of applications is shtei matanos shein arba. Two applications which are four, right? I'm sorry, matana achal shishtayim. One application which is two, because remember again, the blood applications are done by the corners, so effectively they I don't want to use the word splatter. They extend onto two different corners. So therefore, again, halacha l'maisa Beis Shammai says like this, and Beis Hillel, in principle, excuse me. Thank you. In principle, agrees with that. Their only machlokes, thank you, is in the case of the chatos. In the case of the chatos. Whereas by the chatos, Beis Shammai says, ultimately, again, you need two applications in order to affect atonement. And Beis Hillel says, no, even in a chatos, you only need one. So that's the point we're picking up with over here. So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Huna, my time to Beis Shammai. Why does Beis Shammai say that by chatos, you require two applications? And remember again, when we say two, it's really two which are four. Why does he require that? As the Gemara says, the Gemara goes, chronos. Because we'll say, if you look, the Torah mentions corners, right, in different contexts by carbon chatos, and it's written plural. So chronos is two, chronos is two, chronos is two. So halacha l'maisa again, what does that give you? That gives you six. Now, obviously, it can't mean six. Why can't it mean six? Because there are only four corners of the Mizbeach. So therefore, what do I do with that? So the Gemara says, it teaches really what it means to look at it like this. It means to look at it in units of two. What does looking at it in units of two teach me? That teaches me Harikan Sheish, right? So there's six in total. Arba l'mitzvah, Ushtayim la'akid. It means ideally you should try to do four. Oh, thank you. I knew I was missing something. You should try to do four. But at a minimum, you are obligated ultimately again to do two. Thank you so much, Rashi. You're obligated to do two. So we'll say this. So this is. Thank you. So this is Beis Shammai's limud. So again, there's 6 times the Torah mentions corners. It obviously can't mean 6 corners, so it must mean segments of 2. So what it tells you like this: two, right? Four out of the 6 are the ideal, but 2 are necessary and mandatory. That gives me the minimum, ultimately, again, that I require 2 blood applications, shtayim shein arba, 2 which are 4, in order to affect the atonement of the karban chatos. Incredible. What about Beis Hillel? Beis Hillel, chronos. Now, we'll say, now remember again, we've seen this many times throughout Shas. An interesting machlokes, that normally the way it's titled, or the way that it's mentioned is yesh em lemikra or yesh em lemasores. Do we assign primacy ultimately again to how a word is read or to how a word is written? It's interestingly enough, so Beis Hillel will say, at the end of the day, it says chronos. So the way it's written is chronos. How was it? It sounds like the same thing. Except if you look at the way that it's written, the first 2 chronos are written chaser, without a vav, and the last chronos is written ultimately again with a vav. So because Beis Hillel is looking at the way that it's written, he'll look at it like this: the chronos that's written chaser is looked at as 1. So essentially, chronos number 1, that's 1. Chronos number 2, that's 2. And then the chronos that is written mole, that is written complete with the vav, that represents 2. So you have a total of arba, 4. Therefore, again, what do we learn from that? Shalosh lemitzvah va'achas la'akev. That teaches me that ideally, ultimately, again, everyone will agree that ideally you can have 4, but 3 is a lachatchila, and ultimately all you need is 1 in order to affect atonement. So this is the fundamental machlokes, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, and it all comes down to how you darshan chronos. So once again, Beis Shammai's position, you need a minimum of 2 sprinklings for the chatas in order for the chatas to work. Ideally, you should have 4. Beis Hillel, you need a minimum of 1. Okay, the Gemara says, 1 second, this is an incredible idea. The Gemara says, Ve'ema kulhu lemitzvah. So the Gemara says, 1 second, maybe not. Maybe what the Torah is telling me, how do you know that some of these sprinklings are mandatory? When I say mandatory, I should say this: how do you know that some of them are indispensable and some of them are just for a mitzvah? Right? The lashon of mitzvah means this is something nice to do, but if you didn't do it, the karban will still work. So why don't you just say, Ve'ema kulhu lemitzvah? Why don't you just say all the sprinklings are a mitzvah, but if you didn't do any of the sprinklings, ultimately, again, the karban is still effective? Why don't you just say that? It's about this incredible statement, to which the Gemara answers, kapara bichdi lo ashkachan. You can't find kapara with nothing. Bichdi means with nothing. Now Rashi understands with nothing over here means below matan damim, without blood application. In other words, there's no such thing as kapara without blood application. But I will say, if you think about the profundity of that statement, it's quite amazing. The Gemara says, you can't find kapara. Atonement is not found without work. Atonement is not found with nothing. So to think that a karban could atone, ultimately, again, without sprinkling, means a fundamental misunderstanding of the notion of atonement. Atonement is always going to require some effort. Tshuva always requires effort. Change requires effort. So to think that some type of change of status is just going to occur without any additional effort, ultimately, says the Gemara, there's no such thing like that. V'bai saying the other possibility is Hainu time of the Beis Hillel. What's Beis Hillel's logic? Now remember again, Beis Hillel holds that alocha l'maisa fachatos. All you need is 1 blood application. V'bai saying Hainu time of the Beis Hillel. Ahani mikra v'ahani misoras. So listen to this. Now both saying, now remember again, according to Beis Hillel, there's a benefit to how it's read. And remember again, how is it read? It's read chronos, plural, which gives you a total of 6. And v'ahani masoras, and also it helps how it's written. How is it written? Chronos without a vav, chronos without a vav, chronos with a vav. Chronos without a vav is 1. Chronos without a vav is 1. Chronos with a vav is 2, which gives you 4. So the other possibility is Beis Hillel utilizes both of these mechanisms. Now watch this. Ahani mikra litafu yechada. Ultimately, again, the pasuk, the way that the pasuk ultimately, again, is written is helpful in order to go ahead and add on a sprinkling. Sorry, that's how it's read. Ahani mikra litafu yechada. So how it's read ultimately is helpful with adding on a sprinkling. V'ahani masoras And ultimately, again, the way that it is written ultimately is helpful for diminishing one. Take a look at Rashi. Rashi says, Ahani kra temashma sheish, v'ahani masoras temashma arba. So we'll say, so essentially, here's what's interesting about this, right? So essentially, when you look at the way that it is read, that gives you 6. If you look at the way six chronos, 6 sprinklings, so to speak. If you look at the way that it is written, it gives you 4, which means that there's a 1 sprinkling differential. So Beisilel says, that could really be the key over here. Perhaps since there's a 1 sprinkling differential between how the pasuk is read and how the pasuk is written, what does that tell you? That it's that 1 sprinkling that is the necessary one in order to affect atonement. Very interesting drasha. Okay, so the Gemara says, well, if you're going to do that, then, listen to this, Rabbi say, litotafos, tefillin. So remember again, totafos, Rabbi say, if you look at the way that it's written, so once again, harikan arba. So remember again, so Rabbi say, so if you go ahead and you look at the way that it's written, it's totafos number 1 without a vav, that's 1. Totafos number 2 without a vav, that's 1. And totafos male with the vav, that's 2, that's 4. Now that works very well for us. Why? Because remember again, there are 4 compartments in tefillin, right? 4 parshios. So where does that learned out from? From the way that totafos ultimately is written. Harikan arba. Yet on the other hand, Rabbi say, if you look at the way that it's read, it's totafos. What does that mean? Right? What does that equal? That'll equal 6. Right? Because each totafos is 2. So therefore, again, based on the way that it's read, ultimately again, I get 6 compartments for tefillin. Based on the way that it's written, I get 4. To which the Gemara says, why don't we say, Ahani krava, Ahani masoras, chamisha bati bailim aves. So Beisilel, if you're going to use this mechanism, where essentially we look at how you darshan it the way that it's read, look at the way that it's darshaned, ultimately again how it's written, and essentially that differential becomes the halacha. If that's the case, then maybe tefillin should have 5 compartments and not 4. To which the Gemara says, no, saralak Rabbi Akiva da Amar, Tat bekaspi shtayim, pat ba'afriki shtayim. So we'll say this actually, Rashi on the pasuk in the Torah quotes this idea. He holds like Rabbi Akiva. What does Rabbi Akiva say? Rabbi Akiva holds that the word totafos is actually a contraction of 2 foreign dialects. Tat, the word, right? The word tat in kaspi, which is some foreign language, is 2, and pat ba'afriki, right? In some type of African language is 2. Therefore, totafos is 2 plus 2, which equals 4. That gives me ultimately, again, the idea that tefillin has 4 compartments. I will say, by the way, what is going on over here? What does this mean? That tefillin, right? That Akash Baruch Hu is teaching me that tefillin has 4 compartments through a contraction from 2 different languages. So Rabbi Yitzchak B'ditchev says something so beautiful. He quotes the idea, he actually quotes this idea, when Klal Yisrael comes into Eretz Yisrael, in the beginning of Chumash Devarim, as they're getting ready to come into Eretz Yisrael, HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe Rabbeinu to write the Torah be'er hetev, and write it well translated. And again, Rashi points out, what does it mean be'er hetev? Shivim lashon, 70 languages. So asks Rabbi Yitzchak Berditchev, and they're supposed to put this on stones right at the entryway to Eretz Yisrael. So asks Rabbi Yitzchak Berditchev, why? Why does the Torah have to be written in 70 languages? So Pasha Pshat is for the nations of the world to understand this land belongs to the Jewish people. And this land is predicated ultimately again on Torah. Rabbi Yitzchak says something so beautiful. He says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu always creates the refuah before the machla. He always creates the cure before the illness. Moshe Rabbeinu knew that we were going into Eretz Yisrael, and he also knew that we were going to be, unfortunately, expelled from Eretz Yisrael. And there was going to be many years of galus. You might have thought that ruchnius, that spirituality, that Torah, is fundamentally tethered to Eretz Yisrael, and that a Jew outside of Eretz Yisrael cannot have ruchnius. What does HaKadosh Baruch Hu tell Moshe Rabbeinu? Write the Torah in 70 languages. What does that tell you? Wherever you go, your Torah goes with you. There's no such thing as a Jew who's cut off from ruchnius. Yes, of course, is Eretz Yisrael ruchnius on a different level? Of course, we all know it is. Right? Is relationship with Hashem and Eretz Yisrael on a different level? Absolutely. But never think for a second that you are cut off from ruchnius because you are outside of the land. Therefore, Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu, write the Torah in 70 languages. Rabbi Yitzchak says it's the same idea over here. Tefillin is a mitzvah shebaguf. Tefillin is a mitzvah you do with your body, right? And therefore, again, wherever a Jew is, there's tefillin. So where do we learn out tefillin from? From foreign dialects. HaKadosh Baruch Hu teaching us, no matter where you are, you can have a connection with me. No matter where you are geographically, emotionally, spiritually, wherever you are in life, I am there with you and we can have a relationship. V'haraya, tefillin itself, a mitzvah that is so near and dear to us and part of our daily lives, ultimately, again, is derived from foreign languages. Incredible yisod. Ela me'ata. So what about this? Me'ata. Basukos. Oh, Sukkah Gemara. Incredible. What about the Rabbi now? Remember, basukos. So once again, now you could become a little bit proficient in this. Remember, so this is the way that it's written. Based on the way that it's written, how many walls do you come out with? Basukos 1, because it's chaser. Basukos 2, it's chaser. Basukos 2, right? That's malay. It's written completely. That's 4. So based on the way that it's written, you would get 4. Yet based on the way ultimately again that it is vocalized, what would you get? 6. Right? So the Gemara says, Ahani mikra v'ahani masoras. And therefore, again, if we say that generally, the way we do this is we look at the differential between the way that it's written and the way that it's read. And again, so the way that it's read ultimately gives me 6. The way that it's written gives me 4. So perhaps we would say, based on this, the halacha should be that a sukkah should have 5 walls. The Gemara says, if that's the case, Chamisha dafnasa baila me'avad, so top of Lamed Ches 38 hasam. The Gemara says, no, because there's a whole different math over there. Hasam chad kra kule legufei v'chal sichacha asoy. There it's different. I will say why? Because halacha l'maisa, you need one of those sukkos to teach you about the mitzvah of sukkah itself. Right? In other words, I just need one of them teaching me about sukkah. That's number one. I need another one to teach me ultimately again about schach. So that already removes 2. So the Gemara says, Asoy hilchasa v'garasa l'shlishis v'okmisa tavach. Furthermore, again, there's halacha l'mosh misin. I said for both in reality, I'm left with 3. Right? So sukkah needs 3 walls, and then a halacha l'mosh misin, a Sinaitic law comes along and says, by the way, that 3rd wall need not even be a complete wall. All it needs is a tefach. Elameata, but based on the same idea, v'tamash v'ayim. So I'll say, and I'm bringing the Torah speaking about over here. Oh, granddaughter sugya, right? Granddaughter sugya. The Gemara says after a woman gives birth to a girl, so the Gemara says that ultimately again, v'tamash v'ayim. She's tmeya for 2 weeks. For 2 weeks. But I will say, here's what's interesting. If you look at the way that the Torah writes shavu'ayim, it writes it without a vav, in which case it can be vocalized as shivim, 70. So it says the Gemara, shivim, shivim, ahani krab, ahani masor. So therefore, both say, according to the way, ultimately, again, that it is vocalized, ultimately, again, it's 2 weeks. According to the way that it's read, ultimately, again, it's 70 days. So the Gemara says, I would say, let's split the difference and say, va'arboim utrain bailamesov. Maybe she should have to actually observe 42 days of Tumah. Shani hasam d'chsiv kinidasa. It's different over there because why? Because it equates Tumas Leida with Tumas Nida. Now, both saying, I remember the halacha is, how long is Tumas Nida? Midaraisa, 7 days. So the fact that it equates Tumas Leida with Tumas Nida, and this word Shivu'ayim, which could also be vocalized as Shiv'im, but the fact that the Torah is already linking it to Tumas Nida would make more sense to understand it as Shvu'ayim instead of Shiv'im. Okay? V'tana ma'aseh mehacha. And the Tana learns it from here. So I'll say, so remember again, let's take a step back. So remember, all this whole discussion we're having is because Machlokes Sham and Beis Hillel, what is the minimum number of blood applications you need for a chatos? So ultimately, again, Beis Shammai says 2, or really what we call Shtaim Shein Arba, but we'll call it 2. Beis Hillel says 1, which is what's called Achas Shishtayim. So the Gemara says, V'tana ma'aseh mehacha. The Tana could also learn it out from here. Where is he learning it out from? The Gemara says, V'chiper. Now this pasuk is talking about chatas achitzon, which means a chatas that is offered up on the exterior mizbeach. And the avodas are on the outside. So the pasuk says, V'chiper. So ultimately, again, it says V'chiper 3 times. 3 times. Okay, to which the Gemara says, look at Rashi for just a moment. V'chiper. V'si'ir nasi u'si'ira v'kispa shekulam amizbeach achitzon. Right, so these are examples, without even getting into the specific ones. The point of it is the chatas achitzon. So V'alo dinhu, I might have made the following kal v'chomer. Now what's the kal v'chomer? Listen to this. So I'll say, so remember again, the Torah speaks about blood applications that are done lamata, below the red line, the chut sikra on the mizbeach, and it speaks about blood applications that are done above the red line. So it's just like if you were supposed to have a blood application below the red line, and if you only did one application below the red line, ultimately again, the kapara is affected. So too again, for the blood applications that have to be done above the red line, if you just do one blood application, ultimately again, that should be enough. Take a quick look at Rashi for just a moment. Ne'amru damim lamata. Rashi says, Michota sikra. This is very interesting. So kol ha-damim chutz mechatos. V'ne'amru damim lamata. So I say, interestingly enough, so in general, blood applications that are done below the red line, that refers to almost all karbanos aside from carbon chatos. Aside from carbon chatos. V'ne'amru damim lamala michota sikra chatos. So but again, when we talk about blood applications above the red line, generally that's a reference to chatos. So we say like this, mat, so therefore again the rest of the drush is like this. Just like in the blood applications below the chatos, below the red line, if you did one blood application, it's mechaper. So to above the red line, which what's done above the red line? Chatos, one blood application should be mechaper. So we'll say, what do we just learn? What do we just see from here? So that halacha l'maisa, that by chatos, one blood application is enough. Which supports the ruling, ultimately again, of Beis Hillel. So you can also take that in a different direction. It says blood applications inside of the Beis Hamikdash and blood applications outside of the Beis Hamikdash. Madamim, amurim bifnim. Just like when it comes to interior blood applications. Right? If you left out any one of the blood applications, your whole service is invalid. So I could see with blood applications done on the outside, which refers to chatos. If you left out anything, it would be invalid. So we'll say, see what's happening over here? That yields the reverse conclusion. See, the way the Gemara wanted to understand it was the Gemara was comparing blood applications below the red line to blood applications above the red line. The blood applications below the red line essentially refers to every single carbon other than carbon chatos. And we know the halacha is that even if you just ended up doing one blood application, the carbon is effective. So I would compare blood below the line to blood above the line, or blood above the line to blood below the line. So to the blood applications above the red line, i.e. chatos, should be the same halacha, that as long as you did a minimum of one blood application, you're good to go. Beautiful. That supports Hillel, Rabbi Hillel, because Hillel holds that halacha l'maisa, one blood application of chatas is enough to be mechaper. The Gemara says, here's the problem. You could also take that limud in a totally different direction. Why? Because, for example, when it comes to blood, there's interior blood that is sprinkled inside of the Beis Hamikdash itself, versus blood that is sprinkled outside of. When I say outside of the Beis Hamikdash, you're still in the Beis Hamikdash compound, right? But by the outer mizbeach. So I would say like this. Just like by what we'll call interior blood, if you go ahead, sorry. Oh, at the pidgin. Yeah, it's not. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, it's not. Okay, fine. I'm just tomorrow. As of tomorrow, it's just going to be here with the laser pointer and everything. Good. So the Gemara says as follows. I'm sorry. A special thank you to Menachem for this is. Who put it upside down? What's going on over here? Yeah. Jorge's been tampering with the Beis Hamikdash. Yeah, all right, good. So the Gemara says as follows. So the Gemara says, I could compare exterior blood to interior blood. Just like interior. No, I'm good, Alan. I'm really good. Oh, fix it. Okay, good. So right, just like interior blood. Ultimately, again, if you leave out one application, so ultimately, again, it is invalid. So too, I would say exterior blood. If you left out one application, it's also not good. Now, obviously, that then contradicts Hillel, to which the Gemara says, Nira limidome. So the Gemara says, no. We always try to make a comparison to like items. What's the comparison to like items? So the Gemara says, Danin chutz mi chutz, ve'in danin chutz mi bifnim. It's much easier to go ahead and compare what we'll call exterior blood to exterior blood and not exterior blood to interior blood. So therefore, again, it makes much more sense to go back to the original comparison, which was blood sprinkled above the red line and blood sprinkled below the red line, because both of those are sprinkled on the exterior mizbeach. And therefore, the first limud really seems to be the one that we're going to stick with and say, just like blood sprinkled below the red line, which pretty much refers to everything but chatos, as long as you did halacha l'maisa again, as long as you did one blood application in your yotze, so too to blood sprinkled above the red line, i.e. chatos, as long as you did one blood application, you're good to go, and therefore support silal. Okay, or maybe you can make another limud. Done in chatos va'arba kranos, mechatos va'arba kranos. Ultimately, again, we can learn out a case of chatos with the four corners of the mizbeach from another case of chatos and four corners of the mizbeach. The original said, "Va'al yochiach chutz she'ein chatos va'arba karbanos." And ultimately, again, don't learn out for anything from karbanos that are offered on the outside, because again, they don't have a din of chatos in four corners. Talmud lomar v'chiper v'chiper v'chiper. Therefore, again, Abba said the Gemara goes back to the original drasha, v'chiper v'chiper v'chiper, and that's how we started. That's how we started this particular limud. So the Gemara said, how do you learn out these three? V'chiper. So the first chiper teaches me that halacha l'maisa atonement is good even if you only sprinkled on three of the four corners. Listen to this. The chiper. The second chiper says kapara is affected even if you only did two blood applications, two of the corners. The chiper afapi shalonasan ela achas. And the third keeper comes to say, it's interesting, right? Each one is limiting. Third kapara comes to say that even if you just did one sprinkling, ultimately, again, it is going to be effective. One second. Behind me, by the gufay. But one second, you still need one v'chipas. You still need one v'chiper to teach you the actual halacha that sprinkling itself affects atonement. Amar Rava bar Ada Mari Asbroli. So Rava said, Bar Ada Mari explained this to me, and he said as follows: Amar Kra, the pasuk says, v'chiper v'nislach. The pasuk says he will atone. Right, literally again, he will atone and he will be forgiven. Zohi kapara, the zohi slicha. Ultimately, again, kapara and slicha are effectively the same thing. Ema v'chiper afa pi shalom nasan. So why don't we say maybe the chiper could be affected even if there wasn't any nesina, blood application? Right? So why don't we say ultimately, again, maybe the chiper means like this, that even though he only went ahead and did three sprinklings above the red line and one below, that ultimately, again, halacha l'maisa kapara was affected. Or v'chiper afa pishlo nasan ala shtayim lamata u'shtayim lamala. Maybe the second v'chiper teaches me that halacha l'maisa, although again, Abba said for chatos, all blood applications are supposed to be above the red line. Maybe the v'chiper is coming to teach me, no, you still need all the blood applications. But what is the pasuk coming to teach me? That halacha l'maisa, even if not all the blood applications were done on the right spot, the carbon could still be effective. So maybe the first chiper teaches me that even though he only did three blood applications above and one below, the carbon is still good. Another v'chiper afa b'shal nasan ala shtayim lamata u'shtayim lamala. And maybe the second v'chiper teaches me that even though again there was only two blood applications above and two below, it still affects atonement. And v'chiper number three, afa b'shal nasan lamala ela lamata. Maybe v'chiper number three teaches me that even if there were no blood applications at all above the red line, but all were done below, that the carbon is still effective. In other words, what the Gemara is asking over here is, you're using the chiper to teach you that b'di'eved, all you need is one blood application. Maybe the chiper teaches me I need all of the blood applications. So where's the leniency? The leniency is in the placement. Whereas for a chatas, all the blood applications are supposed to be above the red line. B'di'eved, if they were done some combination, or all of them for that matter, done below the red line, perhaps ultimately the carbon will still be effective. Amrav Anda Bar Yitzchak in Cain, Bitalta Toras Arba Kronos. If that's the case, then you have fundamentally undermined the halacha of the four corners. Take a look at Rashi. Rashi's in the wide lines, third wide line in. Bitalta Toras Kronos, Haksuvim Bechatos, Va'achinam Ksiv Be Kronos Tahainu Lamala. And we'll say, we're going to get it. We haven't seen this explicitly, we're going to see this. When the Torah speaks about ultimately, again, Al Karnos HaMizbeach, doing the sprinkling on the corners, we're going to see corners doesn't necessarily have to mean corners. Corners means above the red line. above the red line. So the Gemara says, so here's the issue. The Torah goes out of its way to say sprinkling has to be above the red line. If you're darshaning this, that none of the applications have to be above the red line, then you're fundamentally negating the meaning of a pasuk. Okay? The irachmana amar libatlon. So to which the Gemara says, so what? So what? If that's what the Torah prescribes, then that's the Torah prescribes. Then maybe that should be the halacha. Amar Rava. Ezu davar shetzarach shalosh. So ultimately, again, what is something that requires three? Now we'll see exactly. Look at Rashi for just a moment. Ezu davar shetzarach shalosh. This is in Rashi in the wide lines, about 6 lines in. V'chiper havi omer elu kronos. Kedaminan de bechol chad v'chad miet chad karen. V'kamli akaren achas la'akev. Di kedikamer tashunin di yoiv kulu lamata kasher lamata arba v'chiper havi lemechtav lahakshir arba matanasa. So what's the Gemara says? Amar Ezu davar shetzarach shalosh havi omer elu kronos. This refers ultimately again to the corners, which again now we understand corners of the Mizbeach doesn't literally mean corners. Rather, what does it mean? Above the chut hasikra, above the red line. Ema, the chiper, afapi. I'm going to send that tomorrow. Actually, I realized that it should have. The image we have is very good. The only issue we have is that it's aerial. I'm going to say tomorrow, because we're still going to see tomorrow, just a picture of the Mizbeach. So be able to see exactly, again, from a side view, be able to see the Yisod, be able to see the Chut HaSikra. Again, you could use your imagination. It's good enough for today, right? But Lamaisa, again, Kronos, and we'll see also, when you see on the Mizbeach, again, you can't see it from the aerial view, but if you look from the side view, there actually were protruding, the Gemara calls it horns, right? Karen literally means a horn. They were protruding horns, right? Protruding pillars from each corner of the Mizbeach, and a Chut HaSikra, a red line that went not all the way around, but a lot. So again, when the Torah talks about sprinkling blood on the horns, on the corners, it actually means above the Chut HaSikra. So the Gemara says, Ema v'chiper. Maybe the Chiper teaches me that by Chatos, as long as you did at least one sprinkling above the Chut HaSikra, the red line, and 3 below, you're good to go. You're good to go. In other words, I will say, maybe the halacha is you need all of the sprinklings. You see, remember again, we were darshaning the Chiper, or the way Beis Hillel was darshaning the Chiper, was ultimately again to teach me, or the way we were darshaning for Beis Hillel, is that the Chiper teaches me that all you need is one blood application. Maybe that's not what it means. Maybe it means is you need at least one blood application above the red line, but you still need the other 3. Just the difference is the other 3 could even be below. To which the Gemara says, "Lo matzinu damim shechatzion lemala v'chatzion lemata." We don't see something like that. There's no such thing as a carbon that has some blood applications below and some blood applications above. There's no such thing like that. In other words, a carbon, and I both say, we just learned that. A chatos has its blood applications above the red line. All other carbonos have their blood applications below the red line. So therefore, halacha l'maaseh, there's no such thing as saying, okay, by chatos, you have to make sure to do one above the red line and even the rest could be below. There's no concept like that. There's no construct like that. What you can say is what? What you can say is that for chatos, you need a minimum of 1 blood application above the red line. And therefore, and that's it. And that's it. And then the other blood applications, whether they're done or not done, are going to be inconsequential ultimately again for kapara. But there's no such thing from an avoda perspective of having some blood applications above, some blood applications below. Very interesting. So the Gemara says as follows: V'lo, really? Is that true? Vatnan, we learned. Hiza mimeno achas lamata lamala v'sheva lamata. So Rabbi say this is by Yom Kippur. This is by Yom Kippur. Take a look at Rashi. Achas malav sheva lamata k'dichsiv al pnei kapores kedma v'lefnei kapores yazeh sheva pe'amim kazachadaytcha achas mechatzi avav shel kapores. So remember again, halacha l'maaseh. This is Parshas Acharemos. This is the avoda ultimately again of the Kohen Gadol. So remember again, I will say. So the halacha is he sprinkles in the direction of the kapores. Ultimately, again, of the lid of the top of the aron, and the Torah says ultimately again he does achas lamala v'sheva lamata, 1 above and 7 below, which indicates that there is blood service above and below. Now, granted, I will say, that this is not on the exterior mizbeach, right? This is not ultimately again by the red line on the outer mizbeach, but it doesn't matter. What the Gemara says conceptually, you see a concept that what? That there could be blood applications above and below. So this is really interesting, to which the Gemara says, So I just want to point out how beautiful this is. A Sukkah Gemara, ultimately a Yom Kippur Gemara, and watch this, and a Tefillin Gemara. So what does that teach you? It is easy to be inspired in the peaks of Yiddishkeit, right? Who is not inspired on a Yom Kippur? Who is not inspired on a Yom Kippur? Who is not inspired on a Sukkot? But I will say, that goes without saying. But what's the avodah of a Yid? The avodah of a Yid is to be inspired on Tefillin days. When are Tefillin days? Tefillin days are Sunday through Friday. Every day. Every day. Inspiration cannot be limited. And avodas Hashem, it cannot be limited to days which are inherently laced with profound inspiration, like a Sukkot, like a Yom Kippur. But rather, if you're putting on tefillin that day, any single weekday, ultimately that's a day for inspiration as well. So Morris's point over here is that Allah, so we see that there's sprinklings above and below, to which the Gemara says, no, kimatzlif. That's actually not a case of zrika. It's not a case of sprinkling. What is that? That's matzlif. So what's the definition of matzlif? Sprinkling. All right. So I just want to point out, here's the big difference between English and Lashon HaKodesh. Lashon HaKodesh has distinct words for distinct actions, which in English pretty much translate the same way. So, but what's matzlif? The Gemara says, my matzlif, so machmir Rav Yehuda kemenagda, like someone who whips someone. Okay, so I don't know how many people have a frame of reference for this, right? But Lamaisa, so Rashi uses the example is when Beis Din would, let's say, flog someone, right back to our Malchus days, when Beis Din would flog someone. So we'll say, so what would happen? So remember, we said this, Malchus were divided up by thirds, 1/3 on different parts of the body. But let's say when you're whipping on the back, you wouldn't whip in the same spot. What you would do is you would go ahead and whip and then like move your hand down a little bit, whip so that you're moving down. So when the Kohen would do matzlif, he would kind of do the same thing. He wasn't per se aiming for up here, down here, but rather what matzlif would mean is you would start high and you would like it also you do like a flick of the wrist. Although we will see differences between matzlif and zrika, you would start a little higher, a little lower, a little lower, a little lower, like one who's whipping someone in Beis Din. So therefore, again, it's different because on the Mizbeach, when we speak about above and below, there's premeditated placements to above the red line, below the red line. By the Kohen, it wasn't as much a premeditated placement. It was just, I'm going to start high and continue to go lower. Rashi says over here, look at Rashi, Kiminagdo, Ki Adam Hamake Malkos Abban Beretzu Azula Mata Mizu, Besamach, Velo Shekiven Achas Mechatziav, Olamalo, Vashar Mechatziav, Olamata. Again, when we said before that there's no such thing as blood service, half above, half below, that's talking about premeditated, above the red line, below the red line. When the Kohen Gadol did his matzlif, when he sprinkled the blood, it wasn't premeditated. Just the idea was you started high and you took it low. That's a different parsha. He's al tarashal mizbeach sheva pamim. We're not getting into it now. Rashi also does point out when the Kohen Gadol did the matzlif, it actually looked, in other words, when he started high, so again, visual aids over here, he went like this. When he got lower, he actually went like this. So again, in other words, he started high, the palm of his hand was facing down, ultimately got lower, the palm of his hand was facing up. Just an interesting detail. And then the Gemara goes weiter. He's al taro sham mizbeach shel pamim. If he went ahead and he sprinkled it on Tiharo shal mizbeach. So we'll see what that term means in just a moment. 7 times. So we'll say Amud Beis. I was nervous there for a second. We're going to make it Amud Beis. Good. My love apalgi de mizbeach. So ultimately, again, I will say, now what does it mean, Tiharo? What does that mean, Tiharo? Does that not mean that he sprinkled it on the middle of the mizbeach? And I will say, now, if he's sprinkling blood in the middle of the mizbeach, then what's going to inevitably happen? Some of the blood is going to be above the red line, some of it is going to be below. So the Gemara is bringing this as a raya that you see that sometimes we do sprinkle above and below, to which the Gemara says, no. Gemara says, no. My love, apalge the mizbeach ki da'armi inshi tar tihara diyoma. As people say, the purity of the day has arrived. Now, what's the purity of the day? What does that mean? So the Gemara says that means midday. That means midday. So just like midday is like the middle of the day, so too tohar. What was Lashon? Yeah, tihar. Excuse me. Tiharosh mizbeach also means middle of the mizbeach. To which the Gemara says, lo Rabba bar Shila lo agiluya. No, it actually doesn't mean on the middle of mizbeach. Rather, what does it mean? on the top, the revealed part of the Mizbeach. The top of the Mizbeach, Tichsev, Uke'etzem HaShamayim L'tohar. Okay, so the Gemara says as follows. First of all, look at Rashi. Lagi lo the Mizbeach, al gago sham Mizbeach, shahaya mitaro tchila midesh, and sha'alav umegala es gago. So actually, tiro sham Mizbeach actually refers to the top, exposed part of the Mizbeach, and not the side. Va'ika shirayim. But what about ultimately again? What about shirayim? Now, we'll say, now shirayim is an interesting example. Shirayim is the leftover blood. We'll see that with the leftover blood, ultimately, and you pour it out by the base. So isn't that an example, ultimately, again, of some of the blood being applied? Let's say by a chatos. So that means some of the blood was applied, ultimately, again, above the red line, and the rest, the leftover blood, is poured out below. So don't you have some of the blood service being done above, some of the blood service being done below? To which the Gemara says, no, Shirayim lama akvi. Shirayim is not a good raya because Shirayim is not an essential part of the sacrificial service. And if you went ahead and you didn't do Shirayim at all, the carbon is still effective. What about internal? What about inner Shirayim? Ultimately, again, inner Shirayim, some say are ma'akev, to which the Gemara says, Bechad makom kamir. We're talking about in one place. Inner Shirayim were done separately than the blood service. So we're talking about, again, blood applications in one place. So therefore, both say, bottom line, the conclusion of the Gemara is as follows. Remember, what was the Gemara clearing over? This whole last part was, is there such a thing, ultimately, again, as blood applications on two different parts of the Mizbeach? To which the Gemara effectively comes to the conclusion, the answer to that is no. There is no such thing as blood applications on multiple parts of the Mizbeach. Now again, well, I should say differently. There's no such thing as mandated blood applications on multiple parts of the Mizbeach. Can it be sometimes just through the process of sprinkling that blood ends off in different places? Sure. But essentially for our purposes, there is no such thing as an avoda where there's a mandate to do some of the blood applications above the chut hasikra, above the red line, or below the red line. Rather, halacha l'maisa again, if you're going to have blood applications on the Mizbeach, it is either ultimately again above the red line or below the red line. I will say, just so you should know, interestingly enough, I mean, we'll get to this. Actually, I'm not going to give you the halacha l'maisa, but again, so because we'll do it tomorrow. But we're still left with our raging machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, because remember again, by all other karbanos, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel agree. What do they agree on? That halacha l'maisa, again, all you need is one blood application, ultimately, again, to go ahead and affect atonement. That's all you need. Again, halacha l'maisa, what about by other karbanos? So by chatos is the machlokes. Beis Hillel says all you need is one. Beis Shammai says you need two. That's the machlokes that's still driving us, and Amir Hashem, that's the machlokes we'll pick up with tomorrow. And don't worry, tomorrow's a very short daf. I'm a beis, you could see actually, legitimately, is short. So Amir Hashem, we'll make up some ground tomorrow. Amir Hashem, shkayach everyone. A good chodesh. All right, Chevra, have a great day, everyone. A good chodesh. Can I say that again? Correct. Yom Kippur or Par Helam Davar Minat Tzibor. Correct. That's also on the inside. Yeah, those are called Chatas Panini. But Yom Kippur is the primary example because in Yom Kippur everything was done inside. Almost everything.
Right.